SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Welcome, online educators. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education, where we discuss the realities of virtual education and bring you the best tools for the job from the experts, virtual teachers like you. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Today, we're going to deep dive into UDL, Universal Design for Learning. This isn't a gimmick or thing of the moment. It's a way of thinking about what we present, how we present it, and how students engage with us and our curriculum. There are three aspects to UDL: engagement, representation, and expression. It's a framework for thinking and planning that requires us to look through a lens larger than our own personal lived experiences, preferences, or needs. It helps us create lessons and learning experiences that all our students can engage in fully. My guest today is Tim Batiuk, UDL enthusiast and former online teacher and tech leader. He is going to give us concrete examples of how we can use the UDL framework to make learning accessible to all our students. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. Hi, Tim. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Natalie.
I am thrilled. You are the first podcaster who I have interviewed, so I'm slightly intimidated, but also really intrigued. Can you tell us about the podcast you used to have?
Oh, very little information to tell. I've done some hosting and guesting on the topic of game design, especially in the realm of like tabletop role-playing game type things. I find it a lot of fun, especially creating those games. And I think that's actually why I've had a lot of interest in gamification and education, in kind of designing and curating content for that play experience. So it's actually a nice through line to our conversation today.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking a lot about design today. And you are a former online teacher, and you are currently managing online technology for SYS Education. Why is it that you are so passionate about universal design for learning?
Well, first off, it is kind of rare to get folks with a tech background in education who have actually taught. So I really try to, embrace that as an asset to help me understand better some of the challenges that teachers and students face. And a huge piece of that challenge regards to tech is accessibility. How do we make tech work the best it can for everyone? How can we remove barriers to being able to access that technology? So that conversation around accessibility is just already there. And universal design for learning is a fantastic way to apply these ideas of accessibility to just the whole way that teachers create structure and put out there for all that content that they create.
Absolutely. And it's a framework. So it's not gimmicky. It's not this thing of the moment. It's really a way of looking at everything you do and every way you present information and every way you're asking students to give you information and demonstrate learning back, right?
Yeah, and accessibility is great. I always want to frame it as something that we can celebrate, that we can all benefit from. If we look at accessibility more as this after the fact requirement that we have to patch on to the well-loved things we've already created, and that's the wrong mentality. Instead, I like to pitch people with some ideas of accessible technology that we already use, such as voice typing in Google Docs. I would throw the question out there. Who is that actually for?
Everyone, right? Anyone who is rushing, everyone who thinks it's easier, everyone who needs it. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an accommodation for some folks who will benefit from it for sure. But at the end of the day, yeah, we all benefit from tools like that, tools like text-to-speech, word prediction. Everybody wins. And I think that approach to accessibility, whether it's technology in general or specifically with universal design for learning, that's the right attitude to have with it.
And it makes me think of ADA compliance or those kind of connections. So like how ramps off the end of sidewalks make it easier for all of us to transition from a street to a sidewalk and vice versa. Whether you have a stroller or a kid learning to ride their bike or an old dog like I have, it's so nice to have those ramps, and they are there universally for us all.
Yeah. And while we're going along with that example right there, this concrete example, when would be the best time to create the ramp? Do we pour the concrete for the stairs, have that well-worn method of access, and then after the fact have to patch on a ramp that is the proper pitch and angle and all of that? Or do we build that into the plans in the first place? Is accessibility more successful when we design with that intent in the first place?
Absolutely, because UDL is proactive, not reactive. And just like that, we've all seen instances of reactive or adding on after the fact accommodations or temporary fixes, and they never feel natural, or they don't look physically as good. All of those things in the real concrete world and in our online instruction as well.
Yeah, it's inclusive design for all, not just modifications for some. I mean, that's
Yes.
a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone benefits. And it's not diminishing at all what you're doing or what the student is doing. You're really simply making it accessible to everyone and widening your lens. That kind of leads me to our next question. Why is UDL important? And what does it really mean or look like for teachers and for students in an online class?
For sure. One of the reasons that I think UDL is important is because it is founded in, to quote them, scientific insights into how humans learn. So there is an evidence-based component. That means it's actually grounded in, reality and facts in terms of, if we are making these modifications to a general framework, that there are some evidence-based reasons for doing so. And because UDL is aware of, takes into account the idea that there are barriers to learning, these barriers exist, they are somewhat systemic, they lead to inequity. It specifically addresses ways to clear out those barriers, and at the end of the day, everybody benefits from fewer barriers to learning.
Absolutely. That came up with previous guest, Bree North, when we were talking about barriers to communication between teachers and students. She had said that being able to Google Chat or, in essence, text a teacher provided the fewer number of barriers than maybe having to write an email or even having to speak up in class. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind. How many barriers are we putting in place to student engagement or students communicating effectively with us? Because inequity in education is a real issue, and it's something that we're starting to grapple with more actively now, and the lenses we are looking through, whether we realize it or not, and the centering we do of our own lived experience can really hinder us. So if we just think about it as how we would enter the classroom and what we would need personally, that we're not doing justice to the plethora of students in front of us, and we really need to consider all the learners before we hit publish or before we go live with an idea. Otherwise, we're going to limit the amount that we see from just our day-to-day lives from that narrow focus.
I agree, and I think you described, a really good example of how students on the receiving end of this experience successful implementation of UDL. Because for a student, they don't see these complex systems, these workarounds, roundabout ways. They see attainable access and more ways to share their learning, more means of expression and representation. So for a student, it's just a more streamlined way to describe what they're thinking in a way that is measurable to teachers. Obviously, for teachers, they're designing this, so there's a little more, in terms of what we see on their end. They need to really start with a clear objective. They need to have the end result in mind and focus on that delivery, on reflection, so that as a iterative process, they can keep improving that down the road. And they also need to understand those barriers that exist. And I want to acknowledge that's difficult. I think we can all just say it is difficult to see the world through lenses that are not our own and to consider more perspectives than what we have available to us. But if we aren't really pushing to do that, how are we able to serve all learners? So let's acknowledge it's difficult, but let's do the work too.
Absolutely. It's one thing to acknowledge the challenge, but just like we ask our students to do, right? We don't tell them to stop just because it's hard. It is hard. And I think it involves collaboration a lot of the time. Having another teacher check out what you're doing and see if they can find anything, or they can look at it through another set of eyes and lenses that you were not able to at the time. It's really, really valuable. So, okay, I'm a teacher. I want to start considering UDL in my lessons. I want to break down barriers. I want to limit the inequity that's happening in my class. What do I do? What does it mean to have multiple means of engagement or representation or expression, those 3 pillars of UDL? How do I actually do that?
Well, one of the nice things that we can just sort of defer to start is with the resources that will be included, the CAST website that outlines universal design for learning. This is all broken down into a graphic organizer, which is a fantastic way to take in that information. Yeah, so if someone needs that visual approach, that's already there. But we can talk anecdotally about some examples of this. Let's just talk about easy tools, easy strategies for teachers. Engaging students with some structured but very low stakes peer feedback. The idea being that if the feedback is coming from student to student, it empowers them to be in the seat that a teacher often occupies. And that is going to build their engagement because their voice means so much more. Not just are they the learner, they are also the teacher in the way that their feedback can promote other students' learning. Obviously, this should be structured so that they know kind of the parameters to work within, and super low stakes to start if this isn't a familiar process. But what an easy way to get the ball rolling.
Absolutely. And that shared control is really important, and that time to collaborate is really important, especially when you're online. You can feel isolated, and our students can too. So giving them those, like you said, low stakes. Maybe it's not worth any points. Maybe it's worth participation points. Who knows? But you're getting them into it and getting comfortable.
Yeah, maybe it's a meaningful enough activity that part doesn't even need to be graded, right? If it has enough meaning, then there's reason to show up.
Absolutely. And moving away from that idea, this is a whole nother podcast episode, but that idea of grading and everything having to be worth a point value or something like that. If we're not centering that, then our kids won't either as much. And maybe that's another idea for us as well to ponder.
There are a lot of ways to imbue meaning in work besides having a grade attached to it. But, we'll keep it on topic here and just say, it's all about the grades. How do we support grades with UDL?
Yes. Well, and we have linked the UDL guidelines and the website in our show notes, so teachers can refer to that at any time and go back to it. You can print it. It's fantastic. What are some easy UDL tools or strategies that teachers could start using immediately? If they're listening to us today and they want to do something tomorrow or Monday, what can they start with?
Yeah. So I like to keep it really simple with online assignments, especially if some of this is feeling unfamiliar. And discussion boards, I really love discussion boards. They're so easy to set up. Obviously, they have to be set up well. But going back to that peer feedback idea of the importance of student-to-student interaction, I've used an activity I call it's a question bucket in a discussion, in which students have exactly 2 tasks. Their first task is to post questions around a central topic that everyone's exploring. These can be very simple questions, maybe just recollecting a date, a place, or a page number. They can be increasingly complex, like contrasting and comparing ideas, or hypothesizing and synthesizing new outcomes or possibilities around that topic. But all they have to do is post those questions. The understanding is that who's answering those questions? Other students. So they are setting other students up for success, and everyone is sharing the stakes in that. And as a teacher, I love to just stand back and watch that happen. When I've had a accompanying live class after one of these question buckets, all I do is just screen share the discussion itself and just highlight student success, because they've already done most of the work. And some of the things that I can point out as a teacher is maybe different levels of questioning, some of that higher order thinking that we talked about, not in a way that's positive or negative, but just distinguishing the many different ways that we can probe a topic for these interesting ideas. And all of that happened between students, and that shows that their ways of engaging are meaningful, that they were able to represent their thinking in an important way because they answered a classmate's question. That is an important way that they can show their thinking that another student can recognize.
SYS is an online management company that takes a different approach. We partner with schools to manage solutions. Whether you are a district adding an online option for students or an online school looking to go in a new direction, SYS Education can help make it exactly what you need it to be, with high-quality products at a fraction of the cost that schools pay to other companies. We are not just an educational consulting company, we are online educators ourselves, and a tech team like no other. Let us help you bring your online school experience to the next level. Find out more at syseducation.org or by emailing info@syseducation.org. Set up your free consultation meeting to discuss how SYS might be able to help your school. Yes, and I love the use of discussion boards because that offers a lot of flexibility for representation. You can submit a video, you can submit, something you hand wrote or drew and a picture of that and put it up. You can write text. There are a lot of ways to engage in a discussion board, and it harkens back to what Maddie Dahl was talking about in a previous episode as well, using Google Slides for that application as well, and allowing students to discuss on slides. And the more they're talking to one another, the less our chances of centering ourselves and limiting our lenses, right? And the fewer barriers we place before them, because we're not even there technically. Technically we're there, but the students are the ones engaging with one another and learning from each other. I think that's really, really valuable.
I agree. And, while we're talking visuals too, I'll throw out there one other UDL tool or strategy from the teacher side here. I am all about reducing that decorative clutter in content. Yes, I know as a former elementary teacher, that may make me sound like a bit of a killjoy here. But I love the less is more approach. The idea of, rather than using images for the sake of images, to use ones that are that clarify a text, contextualize it, they're recognizable. Maybe we just stick to these icons that are very simple. They're repeatedly used in the same context so that students make an identification with that visual, and it's adding something to the text rather than detracting from that. Or if you want to just stick to different ways to format your text, if you have a large block of text, you could break it up with a text box, and all that text box does is summarize the information or provide maybe some background knowledge. So the text is broken up visually, but it adds quality, it adds content. And I love that simple approach. Keep it high contrast, keep it simple, keep it recognizable. Everybody, again, benefits from that. Absolutely. And you touched on two really important things that are sticking with me. One is the idea of using recognizable icons. That is so smart. Just like we were talking about, everyone uses text to speech or speech to text, or, those sorts of accommodations that could be just universally designed in our lessons. Those icons should be meaningful too. So if you see, the magnifying glass for doing research, or you see a question mark because you're posing a question or the student's supposed to write a question, things that are going to work in your class but also make sense in science or math or any other application. I think that is really essential. And then also the idea of having less on your screen or less visual clutter, it really helps
your eyes and your mind adjust to what the stimulus is and what is most important. And then something I've learned from you is how screen readers will look at something and read it, and how important that is to not have it cluttered with all this other stuff to make it more accessible.
I can get into how to format table headers so that a screen reader will successfully recognize that content, but that's too boring for this context. It's just it's good to think with all accessibility in mind. I mean, if a learner's need that you're trying to cater to is some additional processing time with the taking in that text or that visual piece that you've provided, giving everyone less information that is more rich and has more depth in terms of what can be done with that little amount. I mean, again, everyone benefits from that, and it's not taking away content just for one learner's needs.
Right. Everyone benefits. That, I hope that is the one thing people take away, our listeners take away from this, is that everyone benefits from universally designing learning opportunities for students in our content. You've given us so many examples of sound practices regarding UDL, and I know you're not a big fan of do's and don'ts necessarily, but are there some no-nos you've seen or some suggestions you have for us regarding UDL and things that you've observed in the real world of online education?
I mean, to clarify, UDL does not provide do's and don'ts because that's a sound practice on their end. I am more than happy to tell people what they should and shouldn't do. So
good point of clarification there.
So starting with screen readers. So this is just one example linking back to the discussion around screen readers and specifically ways to help the engaging content work for more readers. So if you are hyperlinking text that you've provided to another URL, so it's another resource, which is, it's a great thing to do. It's some curated content that someone can choose to explore, give them background knowledge or alternatives to textual information. Great. But choosing a nice, long, descriptive chunk of that text to link to that website, perfect. Do that. However, if you paste the full URL as part of the text, it may look like a very innocent thing to do, but when you hear that read through a screen reader and you hear HTTP : it drives you a little bit crazy. And
Please
so,
no.
it sounds so simple. And the only reason we don't think about that is how often are we listening to our text through a screen reader if that's not something that we personally need to benefit from. So it is expanding that lens. It's important work. And that's just one really easy example.
I love that. So in other words, if I want to link an article or video or something, I should highlight the word article and link it, not just have a hyphen and then copy the entire web address like I do in so many of my emails to my fellow staff members.
Or like a nice long descriptive chunk of text, maybe some phrases or words that's descriptive and illustrative. I do have a little pet peeve of when the word that is hyperlinked is like the word it, and I'm looking at my screen and I have like a 10 by 10 pixel little hitbox that I, maybe if I'm having a little trouble using my trackpad or mouse, it's difficult to select right in there. So let's make that more accessible also.
I feel like you've been reading some of my emails.
I'm like, or listening to
the article, right? Yeah, I guess so. What about representation?
Yeah, I was about to say, in terms of listening to information and that value. So screen readers are great. I love them. I also love when teachers are able to record audio of them perhaps just reading instructions or other text for an assignment. They're able to utilize their own voice, which is personal, meaningful. It is modeling, hearing that human voice with its inflection and the way that it chooses to approach that text. Wonderful. My one caveat that I'd put out there is keep it simple. You could take the time to record a complex video presentation with star wipes and screen capture and picture in picture. That's wonderful, but if you are engaging in a reflective, iterative practice of continuing to improve your content, especially when you get feedback from learners who maybe have some ideas of how to tweak that assignment to be more accessible, you're probably going to need to change those instructions or that text. And it is not fun to re-record that multi-million-dollar multimedia presentation you put together.
Right.
Just record some embedded audio. Hit record, talk like you're talking to a friend, hit stop when you're done. It's surely not going to take you longer to record it than it did to write it. And if you need to redo that later on, that barrier of entry for you is even lower. Like, oh yeah, scrap that. Let's record it again.
Yes. I learned the term evergreen in the last year or two, trying to make things evergreen. So if you keep it simple, you can use it again and again for multiple years or multiple purposes. And I've done this myself and I'm sure many of my fellow special ed teachers and general ed teachers have along with me, simply reading a text that you've assigned to your students can be really powerful. And it doesn't take that much time, assuming you're not reading a full novel or something. It's not time consuming on the part of the teacher, and it gives you an idea for the time your students are putting into your assignment. But just your familiar voice has such a positive impact, and more kids than you realize always use that. They take advantage of it, and it harkens back. I know I keep referring back to previous episodes, and I think it's because UDL really just, if you're doing it, it runs through all of these other ideas, and it really supports all of this other good teaching strategy that we've talked about. But Katie Schweitzer previously said, making accommodations available that we use in real life, in audiobooks and text to speech, like we said at the top of the episode, those are things everyone uses in real life. So, it's just, that's all I have to say about that. All right.
No, I agree. If you were to get some data of who is listening to that text that you record, that audio you make so easily available, it's not just going to be the students with explicit accommodations requiring that. Everyone's benefiting from it, and you're modeling it so well that maybe you're going to be able to get these students to record audio for each other. I mean, if an audiobook is not already available, every student can record their own chapter of that other students benefit from. So you get that student to student learning and that engagement and meaningfulness. And you've modeled that enough that students will be more comfortable sharing their voice in that same way.
Absolutely. And how fun would that be? Some of them would love that. And that would be such a great opportunity for community building too.
Oh, I agree.
All right. The last pillar is what I'm calling them, I think, is expression. And so what ideas do you have for us around expression?
Yeah, so do's and don'ts here. I love creating assignments with just a full set of choices for different media types available to submit someone's thinking. So not just having a single way to express the way that you want to approach that assignment. That's wonderful. Please do that. The one thing I've learned from experience as far as the don't side is expect that every student will be successful with every way of creating different types of media without some type of support available. And I have an example for that. I had it was students were creating a hero's journey story, and the multiple modes of expression available were to write an essay, boring but easy, record a video, challenging but fun, or record a podcast. And nobody chose podcast.
What?
Well, this was a group of sixth graders. I had maybe a paragraph describing what a podcast was, but I don't think I supported them enough to make that meaningful because I didn't show examples of podcasts that other students were actually creating, kiddos their age, or how a podcast is simply spoken word, radio, other familiar things that they already have background knowledge to connect that to. And I didn't provide the supports for that. So students naturally gravitated toward those means of expression that they were already comfortable and familiar with, which is great. But I need to understand that if I'm going to provide multiple media types for expression, I need to provide the same level of supports to make all of those types of media accessible.
Absolutely. That's really great reflective teaching as well. I think we can increase our ability to use the tenets, the pillars of UDL, and to really make that framework more familiar to us just by reflecting on what we're doing and looking for those alternatives, the other ways we could have engaged kids, the other ways we could have given them to represent their ideas or express themselves. I think it's something that maybe isn't natural to us at first, but the more we do it and the more we reflect on what we've done and try to change it for the next time, the easier it becomes.
Agreed. 100%.
Well, this has been so valuable. Thank you so much for kind of demystifying UDL and making it tangible for us and as concrete as those ramps coming off of sidewalks. I think it's just that proactive thinking that we all want to do and a really concrete way of framing it. So thank you for all the amazing information you provided us today.
Oh, I'm just happy to be here. I would love to hear about what teachers come up with from exploring the resources that are going to be linked with this and what they come from this, because I am coming from a limited background of more technology and all of that. I want to hear from the teachers how they make UDL something that is accessible to them and just improves their content and instruction for all students.
Absolutely. The goal of our podcast is to build this really robust community of online educators, and the way to do that is to share what we're learning and share what we're doing. So I look forward to seeing some of that on social media in the coming weeks.
All right, you heard it. People, share that work.
Call to action. Awesome. Thanks again, Tim. It's been really fun talking with you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks go out to our guest today, Tim Batiuk, who taught us that UDL helps us break down barriers to learning and increases our chances of being equitable educators. We have links in the show notes to the CAST website where you'll find all you need to implement the UDL framework and information on how you can get involved in updating the guidelines. If you liked what you heard, please hit the subscribe button. This podcast wouldn't be possible without our excellent team at SYS Education, including our producer, Bo Neal, and our sound engineers, Natalie Farrell and Matt Duran. Want more? Check us out at syseducation.org/AOE and find us on social media. Thanks for listening. Remember to subscribe and always keep learning. You've got this.
Thanks for listening.